Hi, welcome to Mooney Reads. Today I'll be doing my February wrap-up. During the month of February, I participated in a couple of challenges, so I'm going to talk about the books that I did for those first. The main thing that I really wanted to focus on this month was Black History Month, so I made it one of my goals to only read books written by Black authors. But I also participated in a couple of different reading challenges. This first reading challenge I really focused on more, especially on Instagram and things like that, mostly because I was aware of the challenge before the month started, so I was able to prepare for it a little bit better. And that challenge was Blackathon, which is hosted by Jessie from Bow Ties and Books and Lauren from the novel Lush. I focused on the reading prompts for Team Contemporary, although not all of the books that I read were contemporary. I was more focused on the content of the prompts rather than the genre. For most of these prompts, I have more than one book that would fit that prompt, but for these I'm going to be talking about the books either that I chose for the prompt ahead of time, or the book that I just ended up thinking fit. I really didn't want to use one book that fit multiple challenges and then just not have another one, so I designated specific books for specific challenges, and then I also have ones that fit, but I just ended up reading later. The first prompt was Basie Ipke, a work exploring mental health and or disability in Black folks. So the book that I chose for this challenge was Full Disclosure by Cameron Garrett. The main character in this book has HIV, and the bulk of the book talks about her getting into a relationship, finding friends, but it also heavily focuses on what it's like dealing with the stigma that comes with having HIV. Overall, I really liked the book. I gave it a solid 4 stars. The next prompt on the Blackathon contemporary list was Marlon James, an Afrocentric work not set in the US and not centering Black Americans. This is one that I could have done better on. I did not really read anything that was set in another country, with the exception of the first 2 books in the Binti trilogy. I specifically chose Binti Home, the second book in the trilogy, to be my book for this prompt because it's the one that's set for the most part on Earth. It feels like a little bit of a cop-out to use a sci-fi book. Clearly I need to focus on books that are not in the United States. The next prompt was Alexa Martin, a lighthearted work that doesn't center the struggle and features powerful romantic or platonic bonds. And for this prompt, I read Opposite of Always by Justin Reynolds. I enjoyed this book for the most part, but I do think that it was the weakest book that I read this month. The main plot device of going back in time unexpectedly was really interesting. I liked that. I enjoyed the main character, but the thing that really made it difficult for me was the way that the women characters were written and how they were treated. Towards the beginning of the book, I thought that things were mostly okay. The way that it progressed, the love interest character seemed more and more to me to be like, kind of like the perfect combination between the manic pixie dream girl trope and the damsel in distress, and it just really didn't sit well with me. Additionally, the way that the main character's best friend is treated isn't really great. I really enjoyed the descriptions of some of their friendship towards the beginning of the book. However, in the last half to quarter of the book, some things happen and just the way that that character is treated really didn't sit well with me and I don't think was really fully addressed. So that book got 2.5 stars. The next prompt on the Blackathon list was Akweke Emisi, a work where a Black protagonist challenges preconceived notions of Blackness and what Black means. A revolutionary character. For this prompt, I chose March by John Lewis. This is a graphic novel about his own personal experience being in the civil rights movement. Book 1 focuses on his beginnings, his childhood, but also being involved in the nonviolent movement and in those first sit-ins. Any book by or about people who were on the front lines in the civil rights movement is going to count for this prompt because they really were questioning in really big ways the race dynamics and the general idea that most people had of Black people. I really enjoyed this book. I thought that it was really important to get this sort of history straight from somebody who lived it. I think that we learn within schools about sit-ins in the civil rights movement, but a lot of his descriptions of the preparation and what actually happened to them during it was really eye-opening. I gave it 4.5 stars. I really enjoyed this, and I'm looking forward to reading the other 2 parts. So that was it for Blackathon. The other challenge that I participated in was the Black Lit challenge, which was hosted by Seiji from The Artisan Geek. The first prompt for that one was to choose a book written before the 21st century, and for that prompt I chose The Fire Next Time by James Baldwin. This one is pretty short, but it's basically a long essay about his experience going into the civil rights movement. It really focuses in on the role that religion played for him. It was really cool to see another perspective of the civil rights movement. I think this is really important for understanding the diversity of thought within different social movements, particularly obviously the civil rights movement. Prompt number 2 for the Black Lit challenge was a book cover with a black person. For that particular prompt, I chose Ghost Boys by Joel Parker Rhodes. This is a young reader's book that is about police brutality and violence in general towards black boys. I thought that it was a really well done book, especially considering the age group. It did a really good job of being age appropriate while also not diminishing the intensity of the issue. I also thought that it was really entertaining. I liked the supernatural element, and I really loved the historical element that they brought into it by talking about Emmett Till and the actual events that happened around his death. I gave that book 4 stars. The next prompt in the Black Lit challenge was to choose a genre outside of your comfort zone. And for this, I chose the first book in the Binti trilogy. In general, I don't read a ton of sci-fi fantasy. I used to read a little bit more fantasy. I was super into Harry Potter, for instance. I really haven't looked that much into adult sci-fi fantasy. I am holding off on a lot of judgment and definitely star ratings for the Binti series until I finish it. I'm on the waiting list for the 3rd book. I kind of had some problems with the pacing of the first book. However, I think that I understand that choice, but again, I'm going to kind of reserve that final judgment for when I actually read the whole thing. But I did really enjoy the world building in this. It's super fascinating to have all of these little details about these different races. And I also think that there's a lot to unpack, the different things that she's saying about culture and race throughout the story as well. Moving on, the 4th prompt in the Black Lit challenge was to choose an author from outside the US or UK. For this prompt, I chose to read We Should All Be Feminists by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. I thought that this was a good introduction to feminism. Most of the points in this I'm pretty familiar with since I do study women's and gender studies. I really do like that we have a more introductory text from a perspective that is not white and American. However, there were some little details that I took issue with, mostly concerning when she mentioned certain biological things. She did not bring up intersex or trans people. There were maybe 1 or 2 other things that I thought could have had more nuance, and I think the lack of nuance kind of comes from her perspective as a cis person, and as far as I know, as a straight person. So I did take issue with some of those little details. Overall, like I said, I think that it's a good introductory book for people who are super unfamiliar with feminism, so I gave it 4 stars. The other challenge that I wanted to bring up was the Reading Women challenge. Now, overall this month, I did read a fair number of women authors. Of the 19 books that I finished this month, 11 of them had female authors, and 1 of them had a non-binary author. However, like I said towards the beginning of this video, I wanted there to be specific books for specific prompts. So, the prompt that I ended up fulfilling this month was number 6, which is to read a book by a nonfiction historian. And for that prompt, I chose She Came to Slay by Erica Armstrong Dunbar. This was a biography on Harriet Tubman. This book was really accessible and really fun to read. I knew a little bit about Harriet Tubman going in, but clearly not a lot because I learned a ton from this book. I highly recommend it. In general, you learn about Harriet Tubman in school, but we learned maybe this much about her. There's so much more cool stuff that she did. I gave She Came to Slay 4.5 stars. Now I'll be talking about the other books that I read that were not explicitly to fulfill one of these prompts. So first we have Sing Unburied Sing by Jesmyn Ward. This book shifts perspectives throughout and really focuses on this family. I would say the primary main character was the little boy. The bulk of the novel is a road trip that the boy, his sister, and his mom take to go see his stepdad, his mother's boyfriend, who has been in jail. This book hits on a lot of different issues and talks about race and racism in terms of interracial relationships. It also talks a lot about the criminal justice system. I don't want to give too much away necessarily, but there is a supernatural element to it that brings history into it in a very salient way. And I thought that that was incredibly powerful. I highly, highly recommend this book. I gave it 4.5 stars. In general, I think the beginning of this month, my books definitely had a shared theme of looking at the criminal justice system. I read Sing Unburied Sing, and then I read Ghost Boys immediately afterward. And they fit in together in that regard, but also in the supernatural aspect of the book too, which I thought was really cool, as well as the theme of history being really salient in the plot. After I read these books, I read Bastards of the Reagan Era by Reginald Dwayne Betts. This focused on the war on drugs, how Black people and Black communities were treated during this time. He talks about being in the Black community, about being in jail. He talks about politics and the policies. So it's a very important book in all of those regards, but it's also beautifully written. And the number of allusions in this book and the way that he uses them is truly wonderful. I would have to sit down and actually do some research to unpack all of the allusions that he puts in here. He alludes pretty heavily to various hip-hop songs, but he also alludes to different classics as well. Overall, this was a really brilliant set of poems. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars, and then proceeded to go and buy his memoir. He also has a newer book of poetry that I'm looking forward to getting at some point called Felons. The next book that I started that kept with that trend of looking at the criminal justice system was Just Mercy by Bryan Stevenson. This book was incredible in a way that I have a hard time articulating. It really shook me to my core in a way that a lot of books don't. I've read other books on this topic before, but like I said in my first video, the fact that this is personal experience, it has details from the people that he helped as a pro bono lawyer, having all of this framed by his own experience of racism while he's trying to help all of these people and fix these problems was just super powerful. Even if you don't really read nonfiction, you should read this book. I gave it 5 stars, and I wish that I had more stars to give it. The next book that I wanted to talk about that I read was Don't Call Us Dead by Danez Smith. This is another set of poetry, and Just Mercy absolutely did blow me away. This book also blew me away. I want to say almost even more so than Just Mercy, maybe just in a different way because poetry just hits on something different. Throughout the book, they focus on a number of topics. In some of these poems, they talk about their queer identity. There are also a lot of themes throughout the book about HIV, their experience as an HIV positive person. They even talk about that in context with the other violence that they and other people in their community experience. But I absolutely loved this book. I gave it 5 stars and wish I could have given it like 10. The other poetry book that I read this month was Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo. If you haven't heard of Poet X, I would be extremely surprised. It's about a Black Latinx girl who comes from a very religious family, and she is coming of age, figuring out boyfriends, figuring out religion. It was a beautifully written story and a really powerful story. I had some feelings about the ending. I'm not really sure I liked exactly how she did it. However, I still really loved the book. I gave it 4.5 stars. The next books that I wanted to talk about were the various audiobooks that I listened to. The first that I want to talk about is Let's Talk About Love by Claire Kahn. This book focuses on a biromantic asexual girl. The beginning of the book, she is dumped by her girlfriend after she comes out as asexual. Throughout the book, she ends up having a crush on this new boy. And honestly, that part of the book, the romance, the asexuality representation, that plot line was absolutely solid. I loved that representation. I loved that part of the book. The part of the book that I did not like were the relationships that she had with other people. meaning the relationship that she had with her family and the relationship that she had with one of her friends specifically. At the beginning of the book, I was really excited to see the sort of friendship that she had with her two best friends. It was a platonic intimacy that I don't think gets explored often enough. I was kind of rooting for them to be in like kind of a QPR situation, but it didn't happen. But throughout the book, I feel like she was really mistreated by her friend Franny, and I don't think it's really addressed. They talk a lot about the main character Alice's selfishness, and they allude to kind of talking about Franny's, but even though it's acknowledged, Franny does nothing to change her behavior or really want to change her behavior in some ways. I don't know, I thought that the whole situation was questionable. I also thought that her relationship with her family was really not okay. So in the story, her parents really want her to go to law school. They're basically forcing her to get a degree that would be good for law school, and they're aware that the fact that she's uncomfortable with it, but even still, her brother and sister, who are much older than her, don't act necessarily like it's weird. Like, they basically tell her to get over it. None of her friends tell her that her parents shouldn't be deciding her future for her. I was just really uncomfortable with how overbearing her parents were, and the fact that nobody told her that this was weird. So I did end up giving this book 3 stars. The next audiobook that I listened to, I did really like. That was Little and Lion by Brandy Colbert. This book focuses on a girl who just came home for the summer from boarding school. It focuses in part on her figuring out her sexuality as a bisexual person. It also focuses on her and her relationship with her brother who has bipolar disorder. She's sort of figuring out how to be friends with him and how to help him, even though their relationship dynamic has changed. It deals with a few other issues as well. She is in a mixed race family. There's also a piece that religion plays into it as well, because she is Jewish. Their whole family is, although they'd also talk about Lionel's kind of relationship with religion too. Overall, the book talks about a lot of important things. Another little detail that I thought was really important is the fact that this book mentions polyamory as something that's legitimate. Being polyamorous isn't necessarily a conclusion that the main character comes to. However, the main character's best friend, who is a lesbian, talks about being polyamorous during the book, and I thought that that was super cool. I feel like I never see polyamorous rep. Excuse you. So if anyone has good suggestions for good, healthy polyamorous rep that is not sci-fi, fantasy, erotica, please let me know in comments. Not that there's anything wrong with sci-fi, fantasy, erotica, but it is not what I'm interested in reading. Really? Can you not? The final audiobook that I wanted to talk about was The Care and Feeding of Ravenously Hungry Girls by Anissa Gray. I really love this book. And it's funny because the only reason that I decided to read it was because I had seen the cover before and I thought that the cover was really pretty. And as I was scrolling through the audiobook app that my library uses, I saw that it was available. So I went ahead and picked it to listen to. I am so glad that I did. The book is focused on 3 sisters. One of the sisters is being put to trial for stealing money from a charity that she put together. Now, that specific piece of the synopsis would not make this book necessarily something that I would go out of my way to read typically, but I'm really glad that I did read it. It focuses on a lot of other issues. It talks about family dynamics. There's some discussion of abuse and how people talk about abuse. Overall, there's a lot of discussion of mental health. One of the characters has an eating disorder and talks a lot about that. So obviously there's a content warning for abuse and eating disorders. Also an additional content warning for suicidality. The whole book was really engaging and really well written. I gave it 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. Now, the only other 2 books that I read and finished this month were children's books that I read because they were for work. Those were the only 2 books that I read that were not written by Black authors, and those were How to Catch a Unicorn and How to Catch a Dinosaur. I'm only mentioning them because I read them, so I feel like I should. They were pretty cute. If you have a kid who's interested in zoos or unicorns, or if you have a kid who's interested in science fairs or dinosaurs, these are good books. I didn't necessarily think that they were like exceptional picture books, but they were pretty okay. So lastly, I wanted to talk about the books that I started and did not finish. Most of the books that I didn't finish, I do plan on finishing relatively soon. There is only one book that I did not finish and do not intend on finishing not anytime in the near future at any rate. It was not the book's fault that I did not finish it and will probably not finish it. It's kind of my own personal thing with some of the content in the book, and that is What We Lose by Zinzi Clemens. This book basically focuses on this woman going from like young adulthood into adulthood. It focuses a little bit on romance, but a lot on the family. One of the big things in the book is that her mother has breast cancer, and you learn towards the beginning of the book that her mom dies. Initially, I did try to get through it, because in seeing Unburied, seeing the grandmother figure has cancer, and I was able to get through that book. However, her cancer was not central to the plot of Seeing Unburied. In What We Lose, her mom's cancer is very much central to the plot, and that's just not something that I was able to handle because of personal losses that I've had. So in general, it seemed like a moderately interesting book. If you think that it sounds like something that you would like, definitely check it out. The only reason that I even chose that book was just because it was on my library list. I don't think that I've ever heard anyone talk about it. Maybe you should give it a read and see what you think. There were 3 other books that I started or read part of that I did not get to finish that I do intend on finishing. The first one was The Deep by Rivers Solomon. The only reason that I did not finish this was because I found the book on Scribd. I saved it. At the time of saving it, I knew that it was one that was going to come out on Scribd like next month, but when I went back to the lists, I saw it and was like, oh, I forgot that I saved this one. Why isn't this on my list of ones to listen to this month? So I started listening to it and was getting really into it, and then the bit at the end talked about it being a sample. So I was upset, but needless to say, it is going to be the first audiobook that I listen to in April. Another book that I started but have not yet finished is On the Come Up by Angie Thomas. If you don't know what On the Come Up is, what rock are you living under? It's about a girl whose dad was a rapper in the underground but was murdered, and it's her getting into that underground scene. It looks like there's also going to be themes of mental health. She talks about the trauma that she still experiences even though it's been so long since her dad has died. I have some hopes for the friendship themes that might come up in it as well, because she does have 2 best friends that she's had for a really long time. I'm really looking forward to it. This far, I've been listening to it on audiobook, although I do have this copy of it. You'll notice with the weird binding and this giant thing on it, this is an ARC. I work at a bookstore. The only reason I have any ARCs is because they let us take them. Now, if you'll notice, On the Come Up came out in February of last year. I started working at this bookstore like halfway through last year, so I was pretty confused as to why there was this ARC, especially because I didn't notice this ARC until I'd been working there for a few months. So I'm not sure if the publisher sent another ARC because they wanted more people to read it, or maybe somebody brought their ARC back so that other people could read it. I didn't really ask questions. I just knew that I wanted to read this book, and the ARC was sitting there for free on the table, so I took it. So I'll be excited to listen and read along as well. The final book that I started and have not yet finished is Asada, an autobiography by Asada Shakur. I technically started this book in like December. I read a little bit of it this month too. Asada Shakur is an activist. She was big in the civil rights movement. She was a part of the Black Panthers and was framed for the murder of a police officer. This book focuses some on what happens after she got arrested, but it goes back and forth between that and earlier parts of her life as well, as it is an autobiography rather than a memoir. You get kind of a more full picture of her life up until this point. I've been taking this one a little bit more slowly because there is a lot of intense details of police brutality and things like that. But this is a super important book and I'm looking forward to finishing it. So that is all for February's wrap-up. If you've read any of these books, let me know what you thought about them in the comments. And thank you all for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye.